Okay, I hope you all enjoyed those smooth trap beats. We're going to go ahead and get started. Um, so good morning, everybody, and happy Friday. On behalf of the board of the Delaware Valley chapter of ACRL, as well as the program planning committee for today's event, I want to welcome each and every one of you. Even as for many of us, time feels more and more amorphous and undefined, it also simultaneously feels increasingly precious. So thank you so much for giving your time and being here. My name is Jasmine Woodson, and I'm the president of DVC. And I wanted to take a few minutes before we move to our illustrious keynote speakers to talk about, to work out loud and talk about how this event and the events that will follow came to be. So the program planning committee had originally planned an event at Temple University's New Charles Library for the beginning of April, which was titled Working Out Loud, Reflections, Revisions, and Recipes, where the day's presentations would focus on something we don't often talk about in conference environments, which is failure. So of course that didn't go as planned. So instead we used that time and day to have an informal meeting of librarians to talk about their questions, their challenges, to build community and to share strategies. So that was a great meeting. But as time went on, from April to May to June and so on, as things got worse and worse, as more people died, as COVID highlighted socioeconomic disparities, and not just out in society somewhere, but within our institutions, within our libraries, as the murder and disregard of Black lives with little to no consequence continued, as people protested against police brutality and systemic racism en masse, as we were all expected to balance rapidly changing rules and regulations, caregiving, homeschooling, our mental wellness, health concerns, the witnessing of the spectacle that is American politics and the erosion of human rights with increasing work responsibilities and expectations, we, the program planning committee, came to the conclusion, what do we do? What programs would be most useful and most relevant to our community? And who is our community, as we're all kind of displaced and not where we might normally be. So we were thinking not just in terms of content, but also of format. Day-long conferences didn't seem to make as much sense, nor kind of sage on the stage style presentation intensive events. We also wanted critically to hold space to keep dialogues going so that the processes of reflection, growth, change would be ongoing. So we arrived at this place where we created guiding questions that would be centered in all of our events for the year. So these questions are, what factors shape our professional values and beliefs for better and for worse? How do systemic oppression and racism more specifically shape library and archives work? And how can our work serve as a vehicle for social change? So with these questions, we worked from there. So to here and now. So the name of this event is Working Out Loud, Critical Reflections. So that plural is very purposeful, on the next normal. So not the new normal, not the new iteration of an oppressively inflexible status quo, but a normal that evolves as we all begin a practice of searching, thinking, questioning, dismantling, growing, creative, learning, changing. So with that, here is the schedule for today. We are going to have, Eamon and Fobazi are gonna give their keynote, and then we'll have time for a Q&A after that. We'll have the chapter meeting just after that, and there'll be a social hour that you can attend if you're interested in, and then we'll have discussions in the afternoon. So if you could submit questions for Fobazi and Eamon via the Q&A feature in Zoom, that should be at the bottom of your little Zoom interface. And also please use the chat to share insights, ask questions of each other, share any epiphanies you might have. Definitely, feel free to keep the chat popping. And also we have, you can follow us on Twitter at ACRL DVC, and we have a hashtag for this event, which is #DVC Next Normal. So I am going to introduce Eamon and Fobazi. Let me pull up there. Okay. So Fobazi Ettarh is currently the undergraduate success librarian at Rutgers, Newark. A school librarian by training, she specializes in information literacy instruction, K-12 pedagogy, and co-curricular outreach. Her research focuses on the decolonization of white supremacy and librarianship. She is the creator of the open access video game, Killing Me Softly, a game about microaggressions, which leads the user through the personal and professional effects of ongoing microaggressions. Recently, she coined and defined the concept of vocational awe, as seen in the article, Vocational Awe, The Lies We Tell Ourselves. And that's on the Library with the Lead Pipe Journal. And it's amazing. So if you haven't read it, definitely read it. She's a 2020 Library Journal mover and shaker and author of the blog WTF is a Radical Librarian, which examines the intersections of librarianship, labor, identity, and diversity. Our second keynote dialogist, just make that word up, Eamon Tewell, is head of research support and outreach for Columbia University Science, Engineering, and Social Science libraries. Eamon has published and presented on the topics of critical information literacy, library instruction, critical reference practice, and questioning narratives of grit and resilience in libraries. And you can find him on Twitter at Eamon Tewell. So at this point, I'm gonna kick it off to Fobazi and Eamon, and thank you so much for your time being with us today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jasmine.
Okay.
Appreciate the intro. Hi, Fobazi.
Amen.
I'm looking forward to this because it's oh yeah, you can hear. Yeah, it's right. Yeah, no, this is I really appreciate this format because it allows for a more natural dialogue and a conversation as opposed to what's usually kind of a potentially stuffy keynote type of situation. So I'm excited. I guess, do you want to give a little more of an introduction about yourself personally before we get started and into the questions that we have, or get right into it?
Yeah, I guess I could give like a brief one.
Yeah.
I always think it's nice to talk about yourself outside of libraries, especially, as a lot of the things that we talk about tend to reinforce the fact that libraries are like the only things that matter in our lives. And so I always like to say that outside of libraries, I've just moved to Chicago. I'm really liking the Windy City. I'm a big city person, grew up in New Jersey, so right next to New York City. So Chicago counts as a real city to me. Sorry for everyone who doesn't come from real cities like LA and Atlanta and everywhere else. Basically. And in the free time that I try and have, it's hard to go anywhere, but I did try and get as much sunlight basically as possible. The leaves are changing, so we are planning, my fiance and I, Elena, are planning to go to the Arboretum hopefully this weekend. So
sounds nice. Great. Oh, good. Yeah, I guess, let's see, on my end, I mean, I'm excited to be here at this particular event too, because I used to live in Philadelphia. That's where I went to library school. So I attended a few ACRL DVC events when I lived there, when I got my start in libraries, thanks to a series of short-term but paid internships at various libraries in the area. And it's just funny to reflect on that and being here now. I mean, keynoting for local librarians and beyond that alone would like freak me out. But we're doing it over Zoom, which I definitely would not have thought. So anyway, it's really nice to, yeah, be here with all the attendees and with you, because I've appreciated your perspective on libraries for a long time now. So that's great. And I do want to thank also the program planning group, just briefly, Jasmine Woodson, Stephanie Gomez, and Maisha Carey, and the rest of the chapter officers for the work on the event. You know, there's a lot of invisible labor behind any program like this, and I think they did a really great job of setting things up for us. And just a bit more about me, and I guess my perspective, where I'm coming from. I mean, I'm a white, straight, able-bodied male, which does mean I benefit from pretty much every type of privilege there is. And, you know, from living in a society that's founded upon and oriented to uphold white supremacy and patriarchy and ableism. I grew up in like a supportive, lower middle class household. Both my parents, you know, got their master's degrees and went into fields kind of similar to librarianship, like teaching and doing advocacy work. So I've been a librarian for like 11 years now, and I feel like these types of talks are interesting because, you know, maybe my boss is here, maybe not. That's kind of the, it's a thing where it's like, oh, I want to talk frankly about libraries, and like generally my position and, you know, privilege allows me to do so, but there's also kind of a, so that'll be something we'll be, a fine line I'll be treading as we proceed. And very briefly, so I'd like to also importantly give a land acknowledgement before we move into our questions. I and Fobazi and the planning group, we all, I'm sure, want to recognize and extend gratitude to the indigenous peoples who for many years stewarded the land that we occupy across North America. Myself, as well as the attendees today who are in what is today known as New Jersey, and southeastern New York, and eastern Pennsylvania, and northern Delaware, we are all on stolen Lenape lands. And the Lenape people were threatened, they were murdered, they were removed from their lands through coercion and acts of violence, and they're moved westward. So today, a majority of the original Lenape people remain in Oklahoma as the federally recognized tribes of the Delaware Nation and the Delaware Tribe of Indians. And I do think that, you know, because we all live and work on unceded territories, we have a responsibility to educate ourselves about the original stewards of the land that we're on. So I'd like to share just a couple resources that are specific to the Philadelphia and Delaware Valley area. The first is this Indigenous 215 Collective. It's a group of artists, activists, healers, makers, educators, and thinkers who are Indigenous and living in the Philadelphia area. So I'll put a link in the chat here where you can learn more about their work and find ways to support them. And when I was doing a little bit of research for land acknowledgement, I found an essay on the Hidden City website about the presence, or really lack thereof, of the Lenape people in and around Philadelphia. And I learned a lot about Indigenous people's relationship with the present day city by reading it. So I hope you'll take a look when you get a chance and kind of consider how that erasure of Indigenous peoples from places and histories occurs wherever you live. So yeah, so with that, we've broken the questions for this dialogue down into 3 parts. So we'll be kind of looking at what has changed in libraries and I guess our world in general in the last several months, how we can rethink our situations, and then what we can do to bring about the change we need. So big questions, but I think we can definitely get into it. There's, so all right, to start, one question for you, Fobazi. program today, the title is a play on the idea of, a new normal in the time of COVID. And that new normal is this idea that's been repeated like obsessively by media, by policymakers, probably, or workplaces. So to set the stage for what the next normal could be, what is normal in libraries, and should we even try to return to normalcy in the first place? And I see you're frozen, but there you are. Great.
Okay.
You're good now.
Great. So before I answer, I will like to, because Eamon, you gave such a great about me, now I feel like upstaged.
Oh, no.
But I just did want to mention that my undergrad was the University of Delaware, and that I actually met my fiance, Elena, in Philadelphia while I was doing my 2-year residency. So I'm always going to love Philly, both for the perhaps inappropriate 18 to 21 years while I was in college visiting Philly at night, and also for having it be the start of my academic career. The Philly residency was my very first academic library job. I was a school librarian before, so I'm always gonna love Philly despite my disdain for other cities. Philly counts as a real city, so no one get mad at me for that one. But yeah, in terms of normal, I think that right now, unfortunately, normal is a collapse of work-life balance, as we've unfortunately seen, especially on Fridays, where perhaps you would do a lot more sort of water cooler talk, chatting with colleagues, maybe taking a longer lunch. Now there's not really any space for spontaneity like that. Everything is planned, everything is regimented, and now when meetings are back to back, there is less sort of flexibility in being late, because there's this idea that while you're at home, like, we're not going from place to place as you would.
You're not constantly available.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Right.
Like, there's no 5-minute leeway because you're across campus. There's just, as you said, an expectation that you're always available. And the sort of damaging resilience narratives have been upped just 100, 200, 300%. Where it's like, you should just, be there for the library, or all the sort of phrases that now people have used to the ground, right? An unprecedented time, and
exactly.
ever evolving times.
Yeah.
It never seems to mean advocacy for the workers. It always just seems to mean, how can we squeeze more work for less money? How can we put more time into something that perhaps we shouldn't be spending so much time in? And of course, with COVID, the riskiest jobs are, of course, falling to those who are the most marginalized, the ones who are staff, or whatever words they use, paraprofessionals. I just try and use library workers. We're all library workers. It doesn't really matter what the job title is, except of course by administration who use it as a way to figure out sort of how much exploitation to dole out depending on where you fall. So
exactly. Yeah, right, yeah. No, there are a couple of really good points you brought up that I'd like to touch on. I mean, the first thing I thought of with this question, and I know it's like kind of this thing in my head that I can't turn off, but the resilience narratives, vocational awe, just like all of this language and like weaponizing of like service values, right? And applauding the resilience of staff. And that's actually, it's probably easy to get frustrated with, right? But it is also like very harmful, if we like admire people's commitment to the library, it's at this time, right? It's like empty praise at best, but it's very damaging to your self-worth when you're not given any resources or like opportunity to actually create change. I wish someone in a leadership position would just say like, you know what, this sucks. But there's just like, instead, there's this constant messaging that is like, verbal gymnastics to make it seem like things are okay. And that doesn't match up with like what anyone I know is feeling right now. Like, just a quick example, like librarian I supervised a couple of weeks ago, you sent me an email that said meh in the subject line. And, she said like, I'm having a meh kind of day. So I'm gonna log off after this class I'm teaching to rest up for later. So, it's like that I think sums up, I think what we need to do when we have that feeling. And I know it's also meh kind of captures what I've been feeling in a lot of respects personally. But yeah, so, the language part of it, and then also just what that reflects, more importantly, but just that whole kind of libraries have been understaffed and underfunded for decades. So then when something like this hits, it's like crisis mode, like immediately, right? So, that longstanding reliance on library workers to fill all these various roles and, the vocational on service values aspect of that, this continued demand to prove our value as if we're a business, we're not, right? So people, are scared for the jobs. They're returning to work in a pandemic, or they're overworking from home, sometimes both. And it just, like you say, Fobazi puts those responsibilities, like being first to open buildings or to ask patrons to put their masks on, or, staff service desks to do all these riskiest activities. That's on the shoulders of the support staff who, in my library and probably many other people's too, they're the lowest paid full-time employees and primarily people of color. So, just the issues are compounded, and I think they're more visible than ever. So I guess that leads us to our next question. So I'll let you take the lead on that.
yes, a lovely note to start off.
Right, exactly. We're just a couple of sunshine people, yeah.
So yes, in these past 7 months now, it seems like forever, have brought a whole host of issues into sharp relief, especially when we're talking about COVID as relates to library labor. So how do you think libraries have responded to these issues, and how have you responded personally?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I think it's important to take a moment to just kind of recognize how devastating the pandemic has been, like on a human level. Like we have presidents and their administrations like failing quite profoundly in the United States and elsewhere, and we've lost like 1 million plus people worldwide. And I know that you and I both have been deeply affected by COVID. along with countless other people, right? So, just before we get to the level of libraries, just kind of worth acknowledging how awful this is personally, and simultaneously how we've been failed on like this enormous scale, right? So there's that.
Yeah.
But the situation has, I mean, it's just
Yeah. And before you
difficult. Yeah.
get into the the meat of it,
Yeah.
for those who might not know,
Mhm.
Eamon, you yourself had COVID, and my father, unfortunately, um, died from COVID back in the summer. So, when we are talking about these labor issues and how deeply it affects, and when we talk about work-life balance, we really are talking, we know how hard it is.
Yeah, exactly.
We
Yeah.
still really are trying to, make it as best of a situation for everyone. Sorry for
Yeah.
interrupting.
No, understood. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's important to name that specifically, and um yeah, it's super real. It's awful for everybody. It's awful for parents who are trying to figure out what to do with their kids. It's just, it all really sucks. And it's very difficult for libraries, right? That's my segue, if that helps. I mean, it has highlighted for me these giant disparities in like power and in decision making, and how beholden it can feel like we are to what senior administration determines with things. So like, taking library openings, for example, having our libraries open like does put library workers and patrons at risk. Like there's no getting around that fact. If libraries are open, that is a reality. And we can do our security theater, right? We can, make actual efforts towards making spaces more safe. And those efforts are necessary, and people have been putting in a lot of work to do that. But ultimately, the truth is, leaders are making decisions that put people's health on the line, right? So we have like, is offering in-class instruction session, or is faculty, getting a copy of the archival material, like, is it that important? I would argue no. And leaders face certain pressures, right, to reopen services. But I think that there's ever a time to advocate for staff and to like draw a line. It would be now, or realistically, it was a while ago, and the opportunity was missed. And the only thing that could make staff work safely from home is another like statewide mandate or something like that, which results in a lot of honestly distrust and low morale and issues like that I've seen at my workplace. So anyway, over to you.
Yes, as you said, the disparities in terms of who is shouldering the most risk is definitely falling on the ones who are most marginalized.
Mhm.
And I know that for in New Jersey, that Rutgers didn't close until Governor Murphy specifically said, and libraries on college campuses. And so that was by the end of March, almost April, before the library actually closed.
Wow. Yeah.
While I have a chronic illness, I have a disability, so I had been working from home, and I'm definitely, privileged in that I was able to work from home a lot earlier than, March 29th or whatever it was. But basically what I had said was that I'm either working from home or going on FMLA, and what you tell me whichever it is.
Right.
I
One or
couldn't.
the other. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I was like, I value my health too much to, you know, risk it in this manner. And again, as a library faculty, I had enormous privilege in being able to do that. Um,
Yeah.
and, even now, as the library has reopened, so that the students can use the computer lab within the library, it's not the faculty who are staffing the desks or opening the library or any, having to, as you said, tell people to put their masks on. It's the staff who are dealing with all of this, and therefore dealing with the stress and the burnout. And it's like, libraries have not responded well at all in the fact that it's taken, as you said, government mandates in order to close in the first place. And that in many places, libraries have continued to do curbside pickup, even at the expense of their workers. I heard from some of my California library friends, I worked in California for 2 years in SoCal, that those in NorCal were still asked to do curbside pickup during the fires. And it's just like, there is no reason in, like, entire neighborhoods are evacuating. Why are we still to be there for it? Like, whether we want it or not, libraries are seen in communities as sort of a barometer of if things are fine or not. And so by being open, by doing services like this, we are telling people who may not, may be low information, may just, again, buy into that idea that the library is the barometer for if things are fine, that things are in fact fine.
Right,
So,
exactly. Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point, right? I mean, people see that they can still pick up their books. Wow. Then
like
things
how bad
could be bad. Right, exactly. Even if there's, you're literally inhaling smoke at the same time. It's just, yeah. So I think that really does point to that responsibility of libraries, library systems, institutions to, take people's health seriously, to take their workers seriously, right? So, yeah. All right. So, I mean, that leads us to another thing that I was curious to hear your thoughts on of, how libraries have responded to the events over the last several months. And of course, we've seen these massive protests that were sparked by the murder of George Floyd at the hands of police and the continuing Black Lives Matter demonstrations, which has led to some talk, at least, in libraries and or institutions of what to do, right? What to do about it. So have our organizations responded effectively to this renewed call to end anti-Black racism? Oh, what do you think? I mean, the short answer is no, I guess.
Yes, short answer no, long answer no.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But I guess in terms of specifics, I think that in general, libraries haven't really been good with responding to the anti-Black racism and white supremacy in libraries.
Mhm.
And a lot of that is vocational awe, the idea that libraries are sacred and therefore
Mhm.
can do no wrong. And we try to avoid all of the ways that libraries have contributed to white supremacy, from segregation back, during the civil rights movement. Lots of libraries actually closed rather than integrate,
So,
to the policies that we have in place now that marginalize our communities of color, especially Black people, with ID laws, and how they're definitely reinforced more often for Black people than they are other people. Meeting room policies that allow Nazis but don't allow Black Lives Matter groups to meet. Again, it just seems like when we talk about intellectual freedom and we talk about censorship, it always seems to benefit the oppressors and never actually those who need it most. There has been, some nice statements that have come out, but, as we've been talking about, when it comes to the day-to-day, it is our support staff who are primarily of color who are being asked to carry out the most risk of infection to a deadly disease. And even during the whole conversation about closing in the first place, there was lots of pushback because, oh, well, we need the computer labs open due to equity. And it's like, no, that's actually one of the most inequitable things you can do, because now what you're saying is that those who can afford it can have a nice disease-free time in their homes on devices, and those who can't have to now potentially get this disease in order to do their work to continue to be productive, because we haven't actually changed our priorities in
anything. Right, exactly, right. Yeah, no, right. Yeah, that's a really good observation. I mean, and you got at this in your response, but I think it's, an important distinction to make with what libraries say versus what libraries do, right? We all know that those don't always line up. And I appreciate a lot of things about libraries, but we do kind of, also need to realize that they're often committed to upholding status quo and things as they are, right? So I want to share a quote from a chapter by Baharak Yousefi, and she wrote a really great chapter in the book Feminists Among Us, Resistance and Advocacy and Library Leadership. And I'll just drop the name of that in the chat in case anyone wants to see. But it's on this failure of libraries to follow through on their values, right? We have some great things that it seems like all for, but there's a failure to follow through. So Baharak writes, we routinely make decisions that oppose our declared values. We decline opportunities to host forums on democracy and citizen engagement. We claim intellectual freedom as a core value, but silence professional dissent within our own ranks. And disturbingly, we seem to get away with it with few or no repercussions, end quote. And so that's, why does that happen? It's because our institutions are invested in that business as usual, and we can chip away at these power structures, but they're deeply entrenched. So just one other thing that I couldn't help but bring up and share. I mean, we have all these statements being made to the effect of, you know, our institution or our library, you know, supports Black lives, and that's important to say it and make that public. But, you know, there's been a lot of words, and materially very little to nothing actually changes. So there's a really accurate, uncomfortably accurate satirical piece that was published in June on these academic commitments to anti-racism and how they actually come across, and it's called "We Condemn All Institutional Racism Except Our Own," and it's worth a read as well. So I just want to share that. But let's turn to, plenty of problems, we know this. So the second part of our dialogue is on how we can rethink our situations. So I'll hand it over to you. Yeah.
Yes. You know, we can obviously talk about the problems in library archives forever, but I think that it's important for all of us to engage in critical reflection and being able to, you know, take that pause, especially when it feels like everything is just propelling us forward at full speed. And so you know, how do you take that time, if you do, to engage in critical reflection?
Yeah, right. So, I mean, yeah, it's difficult, really difficult to find that time. But I think it does, like, at this moment, it means like realizing and taking seriously that nothing about this is normal, right? Like early in the pandemic, there was this kind of useful reframing of our work from home situation, which was you're not working from home, you're at your home during a crisis trying to work, right? Which accurate, but now we can, I think, amend that to, you know, you're not working from home, you're at home during a crisis trying to work or trying to care for children and arrange childcare and their schooling, or dealing with stress of family members contracting the virus, or yourself getting the virus, you know. So like the pandemic continues, and work and life have only gotten more complicated and difficult, right? And it is an important time, along with that, to find ways to push back against more with less, which has been a thing for a while. And, you know, really kind of look for ways to force our organizations to slow down and take the harder route, right? So critical reflection is, like, I think, is an essential practice. And in times like now, where it feels impossible to like keep up with anything, it's that much more important. So, I mean, it takes time, which is kind of what my issue usually is with finding an opportunity to reflect on things, which isn't really possible when we're expected to constantly adjust and be flexible and be on and available. So if you're in a position of power, the best thing to do is to say, actually, what if we don't do this thing? Or what if we didn't try to replicate everything we did pre-pandemic and instead focus on doing some of those things well, right? And just like, I don't know, a couple of things that I've seen on Twitter that I like as ideas to try and implement, or at least bring up, is like, you know, creating ways to have more space to not be on all the time. So one thing I'm gonna find out about implementing at my library is limiting instruction in our division for each librarian to 2 or 3 days per week, right? So that would kind of mirror the schedule for teaching faculty and allow for necessary breaks for us in between classes. So that's something that may help break things up a little bit. But more broadly, so another idea, right, is, and this will never happen at my library, but maybe it could happen at yours. But you could designate a certain week as meeting free, right? So no meetings are scheduled, and people can attend to like everything else going on in their lives. So, a couple possibilities. And just real briefly, for more ideas on this point, I know I keep sharing links, and thanks for sending them to everyone else at the DVC planning group. But this is a really great essay by Dean Spade on, creating space for reflection, but also like reducing stress and preventing long-term burnout as an organizational goal, which I think is worth a look. Yeah. So my thoughts.
Yeah, the no meetings week sounds like, I don't know if that would happen at
No,
my library.
fair.
Maybe, I don't know. You never know, I guess.
You can dream. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But I think that definitely that, things aren't normal, that right administration has pressures to continue as normal.
Mm-hmm.
And so, some of that top-down pressure may be coming from their bosses as well,
Mm-hmm.
but that it's still important to take that pause to, whether it's not answering emails on the weekends or whatever your days off might be. I always say that when having more and more people put it in their signatures that they, have weekend free email times. And for those who have flexible schedules, I forgot exactly which librarian did it, who I saw their signature, but I just had to read it because I loved it so much. It says, "My working day may not be your working day. Please do not feel obliged to reply to this email outside of your normal working hours." So that, again, allows for that flexibility, because some of us do work on the weekends, so yes, I'm replying on Saturday, but that's because I took Friday off or whatever it might be,
Right.
while still allowing for the fact that other people's schedules might be different. I think that, if possible, not scheduling back-to-back meetings is a way to do that. Usually if we were going to campus or to wherever, we would have, as I said, that downtime in between meetings, even if it was that 5-minute walk in between, right? To be able to breathe and prepare for the next meeting. Definitely, I always schedule lunch on my calendar because, again, with being at home, there is just less of it can feel harder to take lunch and actually take lunch.
Definitely.
Whereas, again, if you're on campus, oh, I didn't bring my lunch today, you have to go to a place and take that time out to order food, to buy it, to go back to the library. Even if you end up eating at your desk, you've still taken those 20 minutes to actually leave and do, get the food and come back. And that there really can be potentially meetings all day without a single break. And I think that it's really important to make sure you have time during the day. And as an organization, I think it's good to remember that eventually, though it doesn't seem like it, 7 months in, eventually this crisis will end.
Yeah.
And our communities will need us more than ever then, trying to figure out what we're trying to figure out what this next normal will be. And so if we're completely burnt out by the time we get there, we're not actually helping our communities at the time that they need it most. And so, even organizationally thinking that way, how can we make sure that when this is over, energy and time our communities?
Yeah, actually thinking and planning for the long term as opposed to just what's immediately right in front of our faces. Yeah, totally. Yep. Well, that brings us to part 3 of our dialogue, which is what we can do to bring about the change we need, right? So we've been getting towards this, but I guess just to ask directly, what does an equitable library look like? And maybe most of all, how can we use this current moment where these issues are so prominent to create alternatives to what currently exists? So that'll be our last question.
Yeah, I think that while, again, it can be hard to think of the long term, I think that an equitable library keeps the long term as a priority. There is always this need to say that progress is more services, more, whatever it might be. It's always more.
Yeah.
But, oftentimes progress is actually less, that we can use this moment to actually think about what are the services that we've been doing just because it's the way we've done it for so long. Yes, we've pivoted some of our services in different ways, but we pivoted, as you said, because we're in a crisis and there wasn't any time given to any of us to think about how to actually do it equitably, how to actually do it in a way that benefits the organization as a whole. And so I think an equitable library thinks about what are the services that we're all doing, from the all the way to the university librarian or the director, the dean, whomever is the person at the very top. How can we spread out services more equitably amongst the organizational chart? How can we model good work-life balance? How can we be more flexible in what certain people might need? I always say that this became the sort of normal while everyone was still trying to figure everything out. that I had personally been fighting to be able to work from home more than one. Every faculty gets 1 day a week to as like a research day, and for a while my health actually improved because we all were working from home, and so therefore I was able to work from home.
Mhm.
And that sort of irony that disabled people everywhere who had been pushing for these accommodations at their various libraries and said, no, there's no way that you can work from home. What are you going to do?
Right,
Whatever
right.
the excuses might be.
Mhm.
Now that it's everyone, right, suddenly it's possible. And
Mhm.
I do worry that when this is all over, that those things will just get rolled back and be like, oh, well, that's all over now.
That was then, right, right. Mhm.
So I think an equitable library actually takes into account the benefits from working from home and actually working from home, not, as you said, right, working from
Mhm.
home, working at home during a crisis,
Right, exactly.
trying to juggle
Yeah.
everything else. I think that, we, as much as, again, vocational awe will try and we're only one institution within a larger society,
Mhm.
and we're not medical workers. Again, as much as libraries are trying to force us to be medical workers. And so therefore, there are very few emergencies in LIS that actually need immediate attention. Things can pretty much always wait until the next day, till Monday morning, whatever it might be, unless there's like a flood or a fire, in which case, again, we as librarians are not putting out the fire, hopefully.
Yeah, right,
you
exactly. Who knows? Maybe.
you never know with, again, vocational law can really
That's
be a
right.
lot.
Yeah.
Hopefully we're actually leaning on other social services to help us in that way.
Mhm.
And I think that as long as passion is the metric that we judge efficacy on, we're never going to have a truly equitable library, because the sort of badge of honor that I work through lunch, I work on my weekends, I answer emails at 2 a.m., I never take sick days, I've maxed out my vacation. That is, again, what vocational awe wants, right? That sort
Mhm.
of subsumption of your entire identity for the library. There can be no equity while that exists. And
Yeah.
so just finding little ways and big ways, but starting with little ways to chip away at that, because again, we're not the best librarian when we're hungry, we're not the best librarian when we're tired, when we're burnt out, when we're
Mhm.
overworked. And so I definitely know that for some it can be hard to take those days, because it's like, oh, well, I have so much work. There's
Mhm.
for archivists, it's like there's a backlog of rooms, like they will never get done. And it's like, but are you
That's
truly,
true. Yeah.
it's like,
Right.
yes, but at the same time, are you truly doing the best work you can be if
Mhm.
you're one so stressed about the backlog, like you're always just thinking, oh, there's a backlog,
Right.
or that you're so burnt out because you have worked through lunches and dinners and weekends for so long that you don't even know when to come up for air. Like, that's not when
Mhm.
we do our best work.
Mhm.
And so I think that's the most important thing, just acknowledging that living your life outside the library actually makes you a better, if we really want to make it super neoliberal, right? Makes you a more productive worker, taking a break. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, right. Like you say, like the work will always be there, and that isn't demonstrated, can't be demonstrated better than just people working constantly, and yet there's more work always, right? So it's just, I think that's an important point. I mean, I'm thinking about my own workplace, and like that work of maneuvering around organizational roadblocks is just like, it's difficult and necessary and exhausting all at the same time. And like there's a lot of people at my library who are committed to building a better library and a better workplace. And we have a like social justice interest group. We have a social justice oriented reading group that meets every couple of months. We have a diversity and inclusion committee that's open to all library staff. We have a committee that advocates on behalf of professional staff, all these things, all these people who are doing great work, but there's still so much red tape and institutional like inertia and so many things that can derail initiatives that everyone agrees on in theory, right? So one thing that I wanted to share, because they're doing great work and I think have a good approach to this type of situation. Our diversity and inclusion committee is, they've taken to identifying the purpose of a given initiative at the start and to take multiple steps to kind of build upon successes and then increase momentum from there, right? So I think it's a trait many of us may have where we're faced with a pressing issue and we're like, what do we do? Make a LibGuide, have a speaker series or something, right? And that's all fine, but there's no considering of how that could like purposefully lead to something more. So, I mean, as an example of this, in a good sense, a group of library staff have worked over the past year and a half at my job, if not longer, to change the illegal alien subject heading in our catalog, right? So it's something that should happen. A lot of people agree upon, but it has required like serious strategizing from them. They submitted a proposal. They organized screenings of the change of subject documentary and had town hall discussions for like library staff and then the university as a whole, all with the goal of building interest and gathering support for making changes. And the next step is going to be to try and get faculty backing, because administrators tend to listen to faculty more than us. So it's, just kind of these continued sustained efforts. And I think building that like collective power and momentum to change our institutions little by little, bit by bit, that's our way to create alternatives. So it is necessary to act, to speak up at a meeting, give voice to a concern, tell a colleague about something you're struggling with, just all sorts of small things that we can do to build up to substantial change, I hope. So that, I don't know, is there any last thoughts you have on that piece, Fobazi? Otherwise, we can share out these reflective questions for everyone.
No, I mean, I think that, as you said, one of the most important things for an equitable library is collective action. I think that as long as there's always transparency amongst all levels of the organizational chart and feedback that is actually listened to and received, that'll go a long way in terms of what an equitable library would be, especially when we're talking about white supremacy and racism in libraries. I know that it can be very hard to bring up the racial issues that are happening within the library, because that white supremacy characteristic of defensiveness can really shut down conversation as things are taken as a personal affront rather than an action that can be changed. So I think that, Okun and Tema I saw it in the chat, talk about white supremacy characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
I think just, learning what those are and using the antidotes that they provide also can go a long way in creating an equitable library.
Totally. Yes. Good point. Yep. Yeah. So we wanted to end by sharing out some reflective questions for attendees to consider later on. And we hope that it'll let you kind of provide some food for thought for identifying what change you can make at your workplace, and those people who you may be able to bring in, who can then bring in other folks. And so I'll paste that in the chat here. And at the end of that document too, there's a really great recently released document called Talking About Contingency at Work, that has scenarios, scripts, and kind of role-based ideas for bringing discussions about precarious labor and contingency into your job. So that's a great specific set of tools there too. So I think I want to provide at least some time for questions. So I'll turn it over to our moderator for the Q&A session.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. We're really happy that everyone was able to be here. And I really want to share my deepest thanks to Eamon and Fobazi for being here and giving us so much personal of yourselves during this really, really difficult time. So we appreciate your labor here. So we don't have a ton of time for questions, but I wanted to, we were asked about your influences. So about who influenced how you think, what librarians or thinkers influenced how you think about things, and who should we be following? Who should we be paying attention to?
There's been a couple of people that I've recently been definitely thinking about in terms of my work. Of course, there's Mia Tokumitsu. She has written about the Do What You Love narrative. And I will put her name in the chat. But I think her work on thinking about what does it mean to do what you love, and how does that result in exploitation is a good way to think about it, especially getting over that defensiveness, like, oh, why shouldn't I love my job? You do need passion in order to not make the day's monotony. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, if most people don't want to work in drudgery every day, they want some sort of emotional tie, but the building of a field or a job around that is what leads to exploitation. Another person is Anne Helen Peterson. She talks a lot about burnout, and she's actually talked about vocational awe as well, crediting me. And she's also talked about sort of she out generation, and you don't have to be a millennial obviously to read it. I think there's a lot of good information there about this current moment where life has become work and work has become life, and what that does to people. So those two people informing my work a lot.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a lot of how I look at libraries and work and labor is, you know, as for many of us, I'm sure shaped by other librarians, and honestly, my own workplace experiences, you know, as it happens. So Emily Drabinski is one person who I've learned a lot from on library labor and critical librarianship in general. There's Katrina Davis Kendrick has done a lot of great work on low morale experiences of librarians, a lot of important research and kind of naming these things that are in our workplaces and giving voice to that. More generally, there's the We Here group. They have a great Twitter presence, and the folks involved with that project are really doing what seems to be an amazing job of building a supportive community for librarians of color. So yeah, it's just, you know, lots of people out there doing great work, and no shortage of places to find good ideas. So some ideas to start. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to read through some of the questions. Let's see. Regarding reopenings and providing some services like curbside, how do you how do you respond to those who argue that students need a safe environment if they don't have any other place to go? How do we go up against that?
Well, my initial thought is just that the library isn't safe either, right? I mean, it's not like a space that's somehow magically immune from other things, whether it's a virus or, you know, policing, white supremacy. It's just, it's, you know, that kind of framing, I think, is a indication of the vocational awe issue in itself. But explaining that to a higher up is another issue, but that's my reaction.
Yeah, and I think just remembering, as I said before, that we're not in fact providing equitable access by being open. We are saying that to those who whatever, that not only do you now have to continue to do your work, but now you have to continue to do your work and also potentially expose yourself to a deadly virus while your classmate workers who have money, who have the privilege, can work safely within their own homes and be safe. So it's not actually an equitable situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And right, students are going through an immensely difficult time too, of course. But yeah, just kind of that framing and equitability aspect is important to keep in mind. Yep.
Okay, the next one. Our academic libraries canceling journals and freeing up funds in our collection budget. What are some ideas for how these funds could be shifted to support racial and social justice?
Yeah, good question. I mean, this is something that actually is being looked at by our diversity and inclusion committee. They're wanting to create a fund specifically for gathering materials that are more representative of authors, of subject areas that are not in our super white collections. So the details are in the works, but yeah, it definitely seems like a good way to make some kind of concrete change within collections.
And I think, you know, at the end of the day, you don't have to overthink it. You know, collection development, you would do it just like any other way you're doing collection development, except you're being mindful of, you know, the authors who are writing these books. You know, whether you're in charge of sociology or microbiology or whatever it might be, you know, thinking about, am I just going to the top sellers and just clicking buy all, right? That tends to privilege the same names. And so, you know, it's just being a little bit more mindful of whom you're buying, you know, maybe thinking about more independent presses. You know, we tend to order from the same university presses as well. But there's a lot of resources, you know, on Twitter, online, where, you know, authors of color are promoting their own work. And so it's just, again, keeping an eye on whatever the field may be, there are authors of color promoting their own work. So just, you know, thinking about how can I make sure that I actually hear about it? You know, my collection development, how am I choosing currently? And just, again, just being more mindful of who is writing, what they're representing, and moving on from there. It doesn't necessarily have to be like, this is the social justice section, you know, just finding own voices in all of these subjects. And then, as the chat says, right, citing those scholars so that they gain more visibility and therefore more citations, because that's sort of how, unfortunately, the academic game works, right? The more citations you have, the more get cited over and over again. So just, again, being more mindful of that.
Great, that's great. Thank you so much. I think that's about all we have time for. This dialogue has been amazing, and I feel really privileged that we all got to hear the both of you speaking. I'm going to turn things over to Jasmine at this point.
Yep. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to do some Zoom clicking here. So excuse me for a minute. Well, first of all, I really can't say enough thank you to Fobazi and Eamon for all of the time and care that you know, first and foremost, that you've put into doing this work, just period, as people, and that you'll continue to put into doing this work. And of course, thank you for your time, sharing your time and wisdom with us today. And also, I really appreciated that you kind of brought the full spectrum of yourselves, and not just here's who I am as a librarian, but here's who I am as a person, and how that's shaped and contributed to that wisdom. So thank you. So we are going to move into the DVC chapter meeting, which is a yearly requirement of ACRL. So whether you're a member, whether you're not a member, but you're local to the region, or if you're on the other side of the country or in another part of the world, please, by all means, feel free to stay and hear more about what we have in the future. So just give me a minute to do a little bit of Zoom shuffling. And I'm going to share my screen. back up a little here. Okay. So I first want to acknowledge the board who have put a lot of time and effort into continuing to grow in terms of thinking creatively about what DVC does. And I also want to acknowledge and applaud the program planning committee who have been on really a truly epic journey of figuring out, what are we doing for this year? But I want to go back to June of this year. So in June, the DVC board published and distributed a Black Lives Matter, and I don't like to call it a statement, it sounds very PR, I'll say like an assertion, which if you want to read it in full, it's on our website. And I want to point attention to that we are really using action verbs here. So not just acknowledging, but committing and dismantling, and really central, we believe that social justice necessitates action, which goes back to what Eamon and Fobazi were talking about. A lot of places released statements, and the statements didn't necessarily translate into everything. But this has really been a guiding kind of light for that has framed those questions. So again, I'm gonna say the questions again. What factors shape our professional values and beliefs for better and for worse? How do systemic oppression and racism more specifically shape library and archives work? And how can our work serve as a vehicle for social change? Those questions were really coming out of that assertion, and our programs are coming out of these questions. So in terms of what we're working toward here, so some new things that are on the horizon for us is we have a brand new committee called the Community Liaison Committee. And that committee is responsible for connecting the Delaware Valley chapter with various community and professionally related organizations. So that includes like, other ACRL chapters, ALA, PLA, but it also includes local librarian unions. I believe there's some work being done with them right now. Also working toward establishing some sort of networking community for those in diversity resident positions. We are also rethinking our student stipend. So in the past, we give out usually $1,000 a year toward a student or students on the basis of, or I should say students in LIS programs, on the basis of an essay that they write in response to a particular prompt. So we want to be sure that we are supporting LIS students, but thinking more about how can we do that maybe better is first, we have decided to make that stipend specifically for historically underrepresented groups in librarianship. And secondly, instead of it maybe being, you wrote a wonderful essay and we're giving you $1,000 and we hope to see you again, but we might not, but actually inviting that student to be a member of the board, because we don't have any student members on our board. And it would be wonderful to have student representation. So the stipend goes toward the time that they would be getting, the stipend would be for the time that they're putting on as a member of the board. I'm sorry, that was really convoluted, but I hope that it made sense. And we also are shifting toward a different model for our program. So the program planning committee, we come up with themes, we come up with topics, and then we build programs around that. And in the spring, we want to shift toward community-led programs. So where programs are being proposed by you all, and we provide the infrastructure and the support, but you all provide the expertise, the thought, the care, the facilitation, and what is the shape and scope of what that program will be. So those are some exciting new things on the horizon. And also for this fall, we have some events planned already, including one in November, which is Critical Connections, Emergent Organizing, Black Library Workers and Community, which will be led by Andrea Lemoyne, who was really a key leading figure in the formation and the successes of the Concerned Black Workers of the Free Library of Philadelphia, and the organizing work that they've done to really institute like massive change in their institution. And I want to stress this is for library workers and is for Black library workers. We also have a event in December, which is a talk back in response to the Change the Subject documentary, which is about activism around the catalog, you know, and the taxonomies that libraries and librarians use and how those can be, reiterate objectification and dehumanization of people. So please keep those in mind. And if you are curious or interested in how to get involved in the board or in DVC, you can run for the board. So we'll have open positions next year. You can join any of our committees. So I mentioned the Community Liaison Committee. We also have a social committee, which does our social events. We have the Program Planning Committee, and we also have a Communications Committee, which manages our social media and our blog. You can submit a program idea, like I had mentioned earlier. We have 2 programs in place. You can be a mentor or review resumes. And then finally, with a little bit of sparkle, you can always join the chapter, because the membership is really the foundation of all the work that we're able to do. And I don't mean that just in terms of membership dues, though that's important, but you all really are the engine, the steering wheel, the road that helps us think more expansively about what the chapter is trying to accomplish and how we can accomplish that. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Adam Mizell, who is our treasurer, and he's gonna give a financial report.
Okay, thank you, Jasmine. Name's Adam Mizell. I use him pronouns. I'm not actually from outer space. I am coming to you from my home in West Philadelphia, which is occupied Delaware and Lenni Lenape land, traditionally known by the name King Sessing, for the land between the Schuylkill River and Cobb's Creek. Just want to again thank Eamon and Fobazi. You guys are some of the thought leaders in the field, and it's I feel really privileged to share this field with you. On to the update. This is I'm in my second term as treasurer. This is maybe the 5th or 6th time I've given one of these updates, and I just want to say this is probably the most excited I've been to be involved in this organization, for all the reasons that Jasmine gave in her great update. And I have big news to share. A couple milestones were able to happen. When I started in 2018, for a variety of reasons, this was an organization that had lived beyond it had allowed its tax status to expire. I am pleased to say that due to a lot of work, we have had our 501c3, tax exempt status reinstated. And I want to personally thank my predecessor, Ellie Goldberg, for putting a lot of her own resources and time on the line to help make that happen. So thank you, whether you're attending or not, Ellie. We've also had a successful membership drive after reinstating a nominal raise in our membership dues, which are still very, very affordable, I'd say, and are maintaining our membership level at just under 100. We'd like that to be more, so I want to underscore the appeal that Jasmine made. Become a member, donate. The programming that we're doing is, I think, innovative, and ways to support the committees that we're doing. I've helped serve on a few of them, and these are good people. They're one of my favorite groups to work with. Now, as for our financial status, we have a total of assets of a little under $28.50, so $2,850 split between our TD Bank account and our PayPal, where we've got some leftover membership dues. Um, it's always an interesting perspective being treasurer and thinking, wow, we actually got here. And the success of this event in particular has, it's been great being able to offer it for free over Zoom, just dealing with you know, all this, the crisis. And that's, it's, the success has kind of put a strain on the tools that we have. Um, I am, one of my projects that I'm looking into as treasurer is, can I get at, you know, get the vendors that we patronize to give us better services to reflect the fact that, you know, we can have an online event and have a national audience, and, you know, raise our ceiling for the number of contacts that we have. We kind of have a strategic place in the Northeast corridor, and we can bring in movers and shakers from New York and New Jersey and DC and such. So with all that in mind, I can confidently report, I am happy with our financial status. Um, I'm never relaxed about it, but the work that we're doing that's supporting our ability to chug along, I'm just so thankful, and want to just am so pleased everybody's here. That's what I got, Jasmine. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Adam. So I'm just gonna wrap up, which will take like a minute. Bring my screen back up here. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Yep, so again, here's the schedule. So welcome to attend the social hour, which will be starting in about 10 minutes. And you don't have to, if you want to go, but you're not gonna be able to make it in 10 minutes, I'm sure it's fine if you join late. And also there, we'll have our afternoon discussions. Could a member of the program planning committee put the links to those things in the chat just so that they're handily available? And again, third time's a charm, right? So these guiding questions, I don't want us to lose track of these as we head into the afternoon. But, you know, they should be the continuous threads of, again, not just this event and this day, but something that we're constantly reflecting on. And these will certainly be a central part of our future programming as well. So what factors shape our professional values and beliefs for better and for worse? How can our work serve as a vehicle for social change? And how do systemic oppression and racism more specifically shape library and archives work? And with that, we're finished here. Again, just want to remind you of our hashtag in our Twitter account. Also, I know we've said a lot of information, and so we'll send a follow-up email to all participants, which will include the recording. We'll ask you for feedback because we want to be sure we're listening and responsive to your thoughts and needs. How to join, how to submit program proposals, how to run for board positions. Yeah, and probably we'll try to aggregate all of the wonderful resources that Eamon and Fobazi shared too and put those in that follow-up email. So expect a very rich and full follow-up from us. And thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for sharing your own challenges and wisdom in the chat. We're all here creating knowledge together. And it's been really wonderful, and I look forward to seeing you in the afternoon. I feel like I need to put the trap music back on.
Is it just us now?
No, no.
No.
This is good intro, outro music for sure. Yeah.